This brings us to the basic structure. So coca crops are a stock and accumulation. It rises when people plant or replant and falls when crops are eradicated, abandoned, or reach the end of their productive life. Two features matter. First, stocks respond slowly. So cutting 10,000 hectares does not matter if 12,000 hectares are being planted or replanting. Second, flows are driven by people acting with delays. Growers do not replant instantly, land recovers, and replanting follows. These delays mask the underlying structural trends. The key inference is simple. Whenever inflows exceed outflows for long enough, the stock rises, no matter how many eradication campaigns are launched. Now, accumulation alone is not enough to explain the counterintuitive pattern. Feedback loops also shape behavior. In general, one could say that the state of a system, for example, the hectares of coca crops, generates a reaction from one or several of the actors, and their reaction in turn has an effect on the system, which then generates another reaction from the actors. But there are different types of feedback loops. Balancing loops regulate behavior, growth is slowed down. For example, higher coca crops call for more eradication, the reaction, and this reduces coca crops. Reinforcing loops amplify behavior, growth calls for faster growth, and decline calls for faster decline. In the case of coca crops, the increased loss of crops causes growers to replant coca crops, which in turn ends up increasing further the coca crops themselves. And balancing loops that involve delays distort the timing of responses. Consider our example. Eradication reduces coca in the short term, which policymakers interpret as a success, but land recovers, growers replant, and that inflow restores the stock. Because monitoring is annual and often several months out of date, intervention levels are set using yesterday's conditions. The result is chronic overreaction and underreaction. The system behaves exactly as its feedback structure dictates. So here is a causal architecture that we formalized for our case. You can see the intended control loops at the center. So control intended from forced eradication and spraying, trying to reduce the hectares of coca crops. You can also see reinforcement loops coming from replanting after interventions or program abandonment or recovery. And you can see the takes times to notice loop driven by monitoring delays. These loops operate simultaneously. No one loop dominates permanently. Their interaction produces the nonlinear behavior that we see in the data. Now, this graph compares the simulated behavior from our model with historical data. This match is strong, as you can see, but the point is not the R squared. The point is that once you include the stock and flow structure and the feedback loops I have described, the system reproduces historical behavioral patterns. From early 2014 to late 2016, you see an exponential growth. So reinforcing loops dominate and inflows exceed outflows. From late 2016 to end 2017, the curve flattens, a temporary period where balancing loops counteract reinforcing ones. And in 2018, you see a modest decline, which is the delayed effect of outflow pressure. These behaviors, again, are not random fluctuations. They are the signature of a feedback-driven stock responding to specific intervention patterns. Now, the advantage of simulation is that it allows us to test interventions safely, transparently, and structurally. So we tested 3 policy families. Family A was attempting to distribute the eradication effort across spraying, forced eradication, and alternative development. Family B tested single interventions in isolation, and Family C introduced measures that block land from entering coca cultivation. So here are the simulation results. I won't be describing each and every one, but from this graph, what I wanted to highlight is that eradication heavy scenarios perform poorly. So see the top lines, A3 and A4. This is because they only address outflows and there are recirculation feedbacks from replanting. By contrast, see A2, alternative development forward scenarios perform better. So reallocating efforts towards alternative development helps, But because we're still not targeting inflows at the level that we should, crops still don't decrease. Now, this point is supported with the single intervention test, where we can see that B3 from aerial spraying is the worst performing scenario, and B1, which is only doing alternative development, is the best performing scenario. Lastly, in our third policy, we added prevention efforts. So prevention, protection, credible alternatives, secured land tenure weakens the reinforcing loops at their source. And when combined with alternative development, it changes the system's arithmetic. So outflows can finally exceed inflows for long enough to make the stock fall. C3 has the most efforts in prevention and is therefore the best performer. The logic is straightforward. You do not empty a bathtub by scooping faster, you just close the tap. To close, 2 points. First, cocoa persistence is structural. This is not a failure of effort. It is the predictable outcome of a system with reinforcing loops, delays, and adaptive actors. Second, continuing to design drug policy with linear logic in a feedback-driven system is a policy failure. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliana. That was super, super interesting. Also saying as a person who has worked on controlling coca cultivation in Latin America quite for long, also in the area of alternative development. Very interesting. I assume there will be many comments and questions afterwards. I would have several, but no time now. I would like to go a little bit, stay in the region, but go a little bit farther south to Peru. Christian, let's see if there are also feedback loops in Peruvian drug policy. Looking forward to your input. Please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see your presentation.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this space. I'm talking in behalf of my co-authors, Nicolás Ceballos and Jared Mujica. Today, I will present the findings of a study regarding the cocaine production and trade system in Peru, published in 2023 in Logos, Ciencia y Tecnología, one of the Colombian police journals. Our research started with a fundamental problem. Usually, when people talk about drug trafficking, people use vague terms. They talk about cartels or mafias without really defining what they do or assuming they control all the business. Our contribution to addressing this issue starts with establishing 3 key research objectives. Map the anatomy to describe the specific activities and tasks of the supply chain. 2, identify the workforce to profile the actors, not as movie villains, but as economic agents. And 3, reconstruct the system to model how these interactions actually work in the real world. How did we do this? We built our theoretical framework on 2 pillars. First, of the concept of logistics of organized crime proposed by Sieber, 1995. And second, the crime scripts methodology by Cornish, 1984. This concept matrix allowed us to break down a complex criminal phenomenon into manageable, observable steps. We combined this theory with extensive fieldwork between 2017 and 2022, analyzing judicial files and conducting dozens of interviews with experts on the ground. So, what is the chain? We define the supply chain simply as the sequence of steps to transform raw material into a final good. Imagine a zoom-in structure. The chain is the macro process. Links are the main connected phases. Activities are groups of tasks within those links. Tasks are the specific actions, the concrete actions like verbs, cutting, drying, buying, selling, transporting. In the Peruvian case, we identified 4 distinct links, 7 major activities, and 51 specific tasks. So let's briefly look at them. Supply of raw material implies sourcing coca leaf and chemical precursors. The second, transformation, includes producing cocaine-based paste and refining it into hydrochloride cocaine. Third, the trade link is the wholesale distribution for export or local markets. Crucially, Our data shows that coca leaf production happens in many territories simultaneously and throughout the entire year, all day long. So it is a continuous industrial engine that never sleeps. And who runs this engine? We identified 12 types of factors, but it is critical to understand that not all of them fit the standard narco stereotype. We distinguish between the exclusive actors, those fully dedicated to the cocaine trade, like the maceration pit managers, cocaine-based base producers, and cocaine hydrochloride refiners. And on the other hand, we have non-exclusive actors, those who perform necessary tasks, but also operate in other illegal supply chains or in the legal economy. So these non-exclusive factors develop two distinct strategies of diversification. First, we have the legal-illegal hybrid type. Our research found, for example, that a trucker moving cocaine derivatives is often simultaneously transporting food products, smuggled appliances, or used clothes, which are illegal in Peru and most part of South America. For these actors, the drug is just one more item in their cargo. They integrate the illicit product into the legal economy to maximize their logistics. Second, we must address the poly-provider type of actor. We cannot ignore the dealer who optimizes their client's list just as the trucker optimizes their cargo. The type here is the actor who establishes themselves as a provider of cocaine, but leverages the same network to distribute marijuana, MDMA, or other synthetics. In both cases, whether mixing drugs with legal appliances or mixing cocaine with ecstasy, the logic is the same. They are rational economic agents maximizing their assets. They are not devoted to cocaine. They are devoted to profit. Furthermore, these actors operate with total autonomy. There is no administrative center for each actor or a human resource department assigning tasks. A coca farmer in one valley does not necessarily coordinate with other coca farmer in another valley. They operate independently, dispersed across vast, difficult territories. This lack of central coordination is not a weakness. In fact, it is a feature that protects the system. So this brings us to the most critical visualization of our study. How do we arrive at this complex diagram? It's the result of layering our findings. First, we map the chain. Second, we map the actors. When we plot all the actors performing all the tasks simultaneously, the third dimension emerges, the system. While traditional models predict just a single box labeled farmer, exporter, or dealer, our constellation shows several independent dots, which theoretically speaking represents tens or thousands of autonomous actors available for that specific task. This multiplicity is what transforms a simple chain into a robust system. It creates a menu of options. There are plenty of them. We may find some theoretical examples of interactions. Flow A is the regular linear interaction. Flow B shows some neutralized dots. However, both flow B and flow C shows that the chain does not break easily. It recomposes. If one dot disappears, another replaces it immediately. Flow D shows how complex a chain supply may be. However, despite this complexity, connectivity between actors is limited and discrete. Actors typically only know their immediate neighbors, the activity before and the activity after. They are restricted by geography and trust. No actor sees the whole picture. This brings us to a major question. Who is in charge of the system? We analyze final judicial cases involving major criminal organizations. These documents prove that even groups neutralized by the justice system operated in extremely reduced zones of the entire system. Let me give you the strongest example. Consider the historical terrorist organization Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path. There is a myth that they control the drug trade in the Braen Valley. The data tell us a different story. Today, Sendero Luminoso lacks the capacity to organize the entire production of a single coca base. They cannot even monopolize the production of a single district. They have been reduced just to another actor in this fragmented system. They provide security services, they tax some routes, but they are just one more piece in the constellation. If an organization with their history and military power cannot control the whole chain, this ratifies that the system fragmentation is stronger than any single organization. We call this parcel control. This leads us to our final and most important conclusion. We must understand that globalization not just transform formal economy, the legal economy, it fundamentally altered the production order of illegal commodities as well. Today, the drug trade relies on structures that are specialized in a small group of tasks. They are fragmentary, segmented, delocalized, and above all, cost efficient. We need to change our mental framework. The modern cocaine supply chain looks much more like Apple than does it like to narco series on Netflix. Like Apple, it relies on specialized components manufactured by third parties, assembled just in time. It is a system defined by flexible specialization. It is not chaotic violence. It is capitalism in its rawest, most efficient form, similar to extractive or technology industry. Ultimately, this research proves that a system approach is essential for understanding criminal organizations and hopefully improving criminal policy. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Christian. That was very, very interesting. And I think plenty of ground for discussion comparing the cocaine industry in Peru and Apple. Very, very inspiring input. Thanks for that. So speaking about raw capitalism, we are moving away from cocaine, going into synthetic drugs, and in Belgium, actually. So let's see what Sophia can present on that issue. Sophia, please, the floor is yours.
I hope you can all see my screen and hear me.
Yes, it's quite small. Maybe you can
Okay.
make it a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I tried. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, all good. Just
Is it okay like this?
maybe a little bigger. Okay. Now we have the preview. What is, I think, is fine.
No, it's not. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No, all good. We had that before, right?
I'm sorry. This is not working. I'll try again. Is this okay now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay.
Excellent.
So hello everyone, my name is Sofia Tesserano. It was already very interesting for me, I think. Today I will talk you through my doctoral research on organized crime groups active on the Belgian synthetic drug supply market. I defended my PhD last summer at Ghent University in Belgium, and I am now working at the prosecutor's office of West Flanders as a criminologist specialized in drug phenomena and policy. So when I talk about synthetic drugs today, I mean the three classic types of synthetic drugs, which are mainly produced on industrial and large scale in Belgium. So those are MDMA or speed, MDMA or ecstasy, amphetamine or speed, and methamphetamine or crystal meth. In 2024, 33 synthetic drug labs were discovered on Belgian territory, and these figures make Belgium the second largest producer of synthetic drugs in Europe after the Netherlands. Moreover, as I explained already, these are not small labs. The production of these drugs is very professional in Belgium, using professional hardware and producing large volumes of drugs. Drugs produced in these labs are sold all over the world to maximize profits. Between 70 to 80% of synthetic drugs found worldwide are produced in an illegal drugs lab in Belgium or the Netherlands. So in other words, all levels of the drug supply chain, from production to wholesale to middle level and retail, take place on Belgian territory. So synthetic drug production and the global trafficking cause various problems in terms of safety, health, and the environment. So this makes synthetic drugs production and trafficking a significant criminological problem for Belgium and by extension for Europe and the whole world. So if we want to tackle this criminological problem effectively, it is important to know who the actors involved are. At the beginning of my PhD, we actually knew very little about the groups involved. So that is where I've started. Since decades, the concept of organized crime is used in the public and scientific debate without thoughtful consideration, and the concept was given several meanings and interpretations depending on the context. So the question I had to ask myself at the start of my PhD was, how should I, as a researcher, then study organized crime given this confusion and given all those definitions of organized crime? So I came across the theory of von Lampe, and he stated that research on organized crime should focus on the underlying phenomena. So that is what I've tried in my research. I've studied the criminal activities, the group structure, and illegal governance. And for this, I've used two data collection methods. I've studied 74 judicial case files, and I've interviewed 29 inmates. As a previous speaker, I also used crime scripting. I've used SNA and financial crime scripting to analyze all the data. Because time is limited today, I will only discuss three main conclusions of my PhD. The first one is research on organized crime groups shows that those groups may differ and show a wide range of cooperation forms, from hierarchical structures to fluid and flexible cooperations. And given this variety of cooperation forms, some researchers argue it is better to study organized crime groups using an overarching paradigm, such as looking at those groups as networks. This approach starts from the idea that human relationships are the basis of all activities, so also organized crime, and individuals operate interdependent from those around them. And in my PhD, I've seen those organized crime groups as social networks consisting of actors or nodes, circles on network maps, and their interrelationships, also called edges in SNA, so the lines between them. And SNA also offers methodological tools to make statements about the size, the centrality and density, and the clustering of a group. So without going into too much detail about the various tools I've used, these measurements and the mapping of the network showed that it is a large network with many actors and many relationships. However, they form one big network, and it is indicated in blue on the map, in which actors can reach each other quite easily. So this type of group offers many opportunities for cooperation, and it forms an optimal structure for the flows of goods, such as drugs, communication, information, and money also. So in terms of cooperation, these measurements of SNA also proved that there is a shift between cooperating partners rather than there are fixed compositions of partnerships. So we speak of flexible partnerships subject to external circumstances. Those are flexible and they adapt to scarcity, knowledge sharing, or drug demand, or new trends, etc. Actors involved in synthetic drug production and trafficking were also involved in other drug production and trafficking, such as cannabis and cocaine, and they were also involved in other types of organized crime, such as illegal arms trafficking, human trafficking, trafficking of women, of clothing or cigarettes. So for criminals involved, business is just business. And the previous speaker also mentioned it a little bit. So therefore, in my PhD, I concluded there is no synthetic drug supply market, but I speak of a polydrug crime market. And using SNA, as I explained previously, I found that 83% of the group were interrelationships that were described as criminal ties. However, this criminal network involved also existing social relationships, such as relationships with family, friends, romantic partners, colleagues, and moreover, more than half of those pre-existing ties were family ties. And my interview participants repeatedly stated that the synthetic drug market was a family business. So during my PhD, I wanted to study the importance of trust, and trust was crucial for the continuation of the criminal activities and the survival of the criminal group. But also those trustworthy and pre-existing relationships were mentioned as their entry into this criminal market. So 6 entryways were mentioned by my participants. So family members, friends in general, colleagues, but also friends in prison, members of the same motorcycle gang, and friends who use drugs together. So as such, organized crime arises from existing social relationships, and it is at the heart of our society and our community. So organized crime should therefore be viewed as part of our society and not as something alien that we need to combat. So another proof of its embeddedness into society is the use of facilitators and corruption. So facilitators are individuals who assist the organized crime group, but are not a group member. Several sectors stood out in my research where corruption was more prevalent, such as farmers, chemical companies, people working in ports, lawyers, etc. And some sectors were also repeatedly used to launder illicit profits, such as construction. Research shows that illegal markets that rely on facilitators and who succeed in corruption into the mainstream are highly resilient. So this is therefore a very important point to focus on by law enforcement to tackle organized crime groups. And this resilience brings me to my last conclusion of the presentation today. SNA showed, my SNA study showed that the network I've studied was a so-called scale-free network, and a scale-free criminal network prioritizes security to avoid detection over efficiency in carrying out criminal activities. A scale-free network also means that if a random actor is removed from the group, this has very little impact on the group, because actors, as I explained, can reach each other through other channels or through other actors. So we can also try to use targeted disruption strategies, and that is what I've tried in the last chapter of my PhD. I've removed specific actors based on SNA theory. I will not go too deeply into the theory of his, but what you should know, or what I've learned during my study, is that targeted disruption strategies work better than random strategies in this kind of network. So I've proven that point of the literature. However, the impact remained rather limited. And of all the targeted disruption strategies I've used based on 3 types of capital, as explained on the slide, targeting actors with high human capital had the least impact on group structure. And this kind of contradicts what law enforcement officials often believe, namely that removing the drug cook or actors who build hardware, for example, will have a major effect on the group. I did not find that in my study. And in my interviews, yeah.
Sophia, sorry, you should come to an end, please.
Yeah, I am. Okay. In my interviews, participants concluded that everyone in the network was replaceable. So when persons were arrested, the network was resilient and actors took over the roles of others. And again, here, because of the high level of trust, family members were mentioned to replace others. So if we want to dismantle and tackle such a network, there is a need for targeted, repeated, long-term and large-scale actions, which ask for a lot of resources and cooperation across borders and levels. And that's why I always finish with the quote, "It takes a network to defeat a network." Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the timing.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Sophia. That was a fascinating X-ray into the Belgium synthetic family drug industry. Very interesting. Would like to immediately hand over to Agnes on the Caribbean. And please, Agnes, you can share your screen now, and we'll move ahead then. Thank you very much.
So you can see it, my screen?
Yes, we can see it. We can hear you very well. So please go ahead.
Perfect. So welcome everyone. My conversation for today is about the privileged location of the Caribbean island, especially Puerto Rico, when I come from, in the narco flows of organized crime. Puerto Rico has been a territory of the United States since 1898, so with almost over a century, the U.S. is considered a strategic point to learn more about the Caribbean behaviors. And following the news on these days, the Puerto Rican island is used as a military hub for the United States personnel to combat the narco trafficking with Venezuela. So in this map that you can see here, you can find us here. So here when I come from. So the Caribbean serves as a vital hub in the global drug trade, primarily because of the geographic position. You see here, we have like a quietly neat position also to the Europe side, but also to the Central, South, and North America. So is this geographic position, porous borders, and fragile governance, which make the Caribbean island essential transit to and staging area for the organized crimes today's and the narco trafficking businesses. Many drug trafficking and organized crimes cases in Puerto Rico specifically are connected with our relationships with countries such as Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Colombia. And lastly, and as a new with Mexico. Federal agencies located in Puerto Rico, because our relationship with the United States, prosecute these organizations annually, driven by the considerable volume of drug seizures and the vast amount of the money involved. Furthermore, this group has developed sophisticated strategies to reorganization super fast following drug bust. The significant demand of illicit drugs in the eastern of the United States, that is this area, and Europe, coupled with Puerto Rico, a strategic location, established both Puerto Rico and the other Caribbean island as a critical point for distribution and redistribution. Here that you see in this slide, and before continue, I would like to ask the audience to think about which factors do you think makes the Caribbean more vulnerable than other regions. So following to the next slide, several keys that you see here shapes the opportunity for narco-trafficking and organized crimes in the Caribbean. A significant aspect is the vulnerability of the geographic and geopolitical organizations to external nations. This situation creates avenues of criminal organization, especially in areas with high levels of violence, as Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico have a big high violence rate on these days, and Haiti. It is crucial not only to share intelligence data, but also to build alliances with other countries near to our island to comprehend the collaborative effects of working together or asynchronously. Intelligence-led solutions in these days to combating organized crimes and narco-trafficking is based on the predictive intelligence frameworks in regional areas, are essential for enhancing collaboration among other law enforcement agencies, particularly for independent researchers seeking access to information. These researchers aim to analyze the data to understand the underlying reasons for observed declines, determine whether they are intentional or unintentional, especially from the context of the advantages associated with organized crime and drug trafficking. Furthermore, it's vital to address the long-term implications for governance and development. So it's part of our conversation from the Caribbean islands to learn to understand the behavior of which challenges impede the successful implementation of intelligence-led approaches with our region. Furthermore, which strategic measure we can use or can we adopt to address these obstacles to ensure impactful outcome effectively. Last and not least, as independent researchers in different and other colleagues from the Caribbean island, we wish to underscore the necessity to both regional and global collaboration, and this is a great space to share what's happening in the Caribbean island about organized crime and how organized crime is a great spot for organizations and the drug business share and be more collaborative with other countries. So I invite policymakers, scholars, and practitioners to incorporate the Caribbean perspective in this conversation of organized crimes into their frameworks, how we can better include the Caribbean voices in international crime research and policy. So basically, Puerto Rico, it's looking to have a great conversation with big countries about how we are this bridge to the United States and from Europa to trade organized crime, materials, drugs, people, and also firearms. So the intelligence-led solution provide us a great opportunity to start these conversations and work in a collaborative environment to enhance the opportunities to combat. So that's all about my presentation from the Caribbean perspective. If you want to more about these projects, please, you can share this information. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Agnes. Very, very interesting. Actually, we now at the GI, we have now quite a lot of research going on in the Caribbean, both regarding drug trafficking trends from the Caribbean to Europe, but also several colleagues now working on drug trafficking within the region, but also arms trafficking. So happy to connect you after this meeting to them for an exchange.
I will honor it to learn more about it. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Great. Thanks, Agnes. I would like to invite Ruby, actually our only private sector representative here on the panel. Very much looking forward to your presentation. And yeah, the floor is yours, Ruby, please. And
Thank you very
we
much.
see it very well, and we hear you very well. So you can
Super.
go ahead.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and a very good morning or good afternoon to my fellow speakers and to the esteemed audience. Today, I want to talk about fair treatment at sea, specifically how we can reform the response to maritime drug smuggling to better protect seafarers and uphold justice in an increasingly complex environment. Let's start with the big picture. So cocaine production has reached unprecedented levels, over 3,700 tons in 2003 to 2024, 2023 to 2024, which is a staggering 34% increase year on year. So this isn't just a statistic, it's a sign of how the global drug trade is evolving and is intensifying. Maritime routes are now the backbone of transatlantic cocaine trafficking. So if we have a quick look at the map on the left, you will see how these routes crisscross the Americas, with cargo vessels playing a central role. 31% of all seizures involve these ships. Ports like Antwerp, Cartagena, and Cologne are hotspots, with tens of tons seized in a single quarter. This isn't just about numbers. It's about the pressure and risk placed on the maritime industry, which we see, as well as insurers, and most importantly, on the seafarers themselves. But behind every statistic are real people. Seafarers are increasingly caught in the crossfire. They face detention, prosecution, and obviously reputational harm. Too often, they are treated as suspects rather than witnesses or even victims. So let's be clear, seafarers are not border agents, yet they are on the front line of a global security and humanitarian challenge. We can look back to the recent examples in the series of US military strikes on Venezuelan boats suspected of smuggling drugs. These actions mark a significant escalation in how some states are responding to maritime drug trafficking, moving from interdiction and law enforcement to direct military action. Although these strikes have targeted vessels believed to be operated by criminal groups, they raise serious legal and humanitarian questions. There is a growing risk that legitimate seafarers could be misidentified or inadvertently caught up in such operations, facing detention, prosecution, or even physical harm. The international response has highlighted concerns about due process, the use of force at sea, and the need for clear legal frameworks to protect those working in maritime environments. This evolving security landscape underscores why fair treatment and robust protections for seafarers are more important than ever. It underlines that this is not just a legal issue, it is a human rights one. So why does this keep happening? First, there's a persistent presumption of guilt, even when the crews themselves report the drugs which they have cited on the vessels or within the cargo. As in the UBC Savannah, the Phoenician M, and recent cases in Antwerp, they are often detained and treated as criminals. The IMO-ILO fair treatment guidelines exist, but only at an operational level among port authorities, prosecutors, and judges. There's a clear lack of awareness and accountability. Legal frameworks are also inconsistent. Only 60% of countries criminalize personal drug use, but 90% criminalize possession. This creates confusion and ultimately injustice for seafarers. Jurisdictional inconsistencies and a lack of harmonized protocols mean arbitrary decisions are all too common. Insurers, and especially P&I clubs, where I am with at school here in Oslo, play a crucial role before, during, and after incidents. Before an incident, we help with risk prevention, so assessing port profiles, advising on contracts, and supporting crew training if needed. During a crisis, we activate 24/7 support. We coordinate with local experts and ensure crew welfare, access to consular support, translators, and any health assistance. Afterwards, we debrief, we support legal reform, and help with crew reintegration. We also advocate for best practices cross-club coordination, and real-time diplomatic advocacy. Ultimately, insurers bridge the gap between maritime realities and legal or judicial processes. So what can we do? First, advocacy is key. We must push for the consistent adoption of the IMO/ILO fair treatment guidelines and ensure judicial training across all jurisdictions. But I want to go further. While these guidelines are a vital reference, their voluntary nature limits their impact. I believe it's time to consider elevating them, perhaps transforming them into a binding convention, or at least embedding their principles into national laws. I'm aware that conventions like SOLAS and the Maritime Labour Convention already contain mandatory provisions for investigations and seafarers' rights. However, the fair treatment guidelines themselves remain non-binding. Drawing on the ITF criminalization toolkit, we see that where guidelines have been incorporated into primary legislation, seafarers are better protected. Where they are not, enforcement is patchy at best. So perhaps the next step is for the international community, through the IMO and ILO, to consider making fair treatment not just a guideline, but a global standard with real teeth. We also need structured engagement, bringing together IG clubs, the IMO, UNODC, flag states, and judicial networks. A network approach means sharing intelligence, harmonizing protocols, and ensuring that no seafarer falls through the cracks because of jurisdictional gaps. Data-driven reform is another pillar. By tracking and analyzing cases, we can identify high-risk ports and systemic vulnerabilities. The chart here shows how intelligence can inform policy, improve risk assessments, and help us prioritize resources where they are needed most. And finally, insurers must continue to bridge the gap between operational realities and legal processes, fostering mutual understanding and ensuring fair treatment for all seafarers. At the end of the day, the criminalization is a humanitarian crisis. Crew members face trauma, reputational damage, and career loss. Mental health and reintegration support are essential, not just for those acquitted, but for anyone who's been through this ordeal. For treatment of seafarers, fair treatment of seafarers is a collective responsibility. It's not just about ticking the boxes. It's about upholding the human rights and dignity of the seafarers, no matter which courtroom or country or jurisdiction is involved. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Very interesting and I think very timely issue considering what is happening right now in the Caribbean. So that may come up in the discussion later. Thanks again. We are moving on to our last, but certainly not least, input from Christina, going back to an actor-based perspective and very much looking forward to your presentation on evangelical organized crime groups from Brazil. And I had not been aware that those exist before. So please, Christina, the floor is yours. We see your presentation very well. And please, you can go ahead.
Well, okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for the very interesting presentations before me. Well, my topic is a little bit different. So it's about the mixture between religion and organized crime groups in Brazil, where I am normally based, where I've been living for around 15 years in Rio de Janeiro. So I'm talking about a phenomena that's currently actually quite a lot in the news, so-called narco-Pentecostals or evangelical drug traffickers, meaning drug traffickers who use religion in order to expand their illegal businesses. Well, I'm talking about a very specific faction, which is called the Israel Complex, or sometimes Aaron's Troop, in the north zone of Rio de Janeiro. So it's a territory which comprises around 5 neighborhoods, and where most notably a network or a link between neo-Pentecostal churches and drug trafficking networks has been established. Yeah, I mean, this presentation is quite long, so I'm trying to be a little bit concise. I think the most interesting thing to dive in is when we look actually at the symbology a little bit. So in these territories controlled by this faction, it's actually subfaction of the TCP faction, but I'm coming to this. In their territories, you have these very different or very like notable symbologies, which refer to prominent doctrines and evangelical faith. Also, some of them they actually refer a lot to Judaism and also in particular the state of Israel. So this is, if you actually go into this literature about other evangelical currents, it's sort of a common thing. It also has a lot to do with the former president Jair Bolsonaro, and he also his and other I don't know, attempts to somehow appropriate the symbology, in particular of Israel, to appeal to certain voters or to make use of political gains through this appropriation, right? The most interesting symbol that you see here is like a graffiti, where you see, like, for instance, Jesus is the owner of the place, which is in one of these neighborhoods controlled by these drug traffickers. Another thing, you see the swimming pool, it's actually of one of the leaders, Pichon, in one of his houses, and the police raided it, and you can see somehow the return to the Holy Land, something like this. So you have these symbols everywhere. And just a little bit of context, because actually this whole issue is super complex. So in Rio, you have different drug trafficking factions. The most famous one, or the most traditional one, is the Comando Vermelho, so-called Red Command. Amigos dos Amigos, Terceiro Comando Puro, which is like the larger faction of which these religious traffickers form part of. And they are quite new in the city. Then you also have other criminal actors, which is paramilitary and para-police forces and militias. And what we have observed in recent years is that the territory occupied by militias, also known as paramilitary forces, they have spread a lot. And that police operations target mostly territories occupied by the Comando Vermelho. This is like a little bit of background information. So you can see here, like the militia is like the green, the blue ones. The Comando Vermelho is like the red territories. I mean, this is whole like the state of Rio de Janeiro, right? So you see actually like how deeply entrenched organized crime is with the city. So there's nearly no area which is not controlled by some sort of group. Most of these groups, they are concentrated in like poor neighborhoods in so-called favelas. So this is a little bit of the background and how crime groups were organized. So as I said, in recent years, one of the faction who has made like a huge increase or a huge gain in territory, which is actually quite new actually to the city, is the Terceiro Comando Puro, the TCP. And it's quite interesting because I attended actually a couple of weeks ago another workshop here, another conference about criminal ideologies, where also other researchers were studying not just evangelical drug traffickers as I do, but for instance, the Comando Vermelho. And like their ideology is much more like somehow not really workers oriented, but like they have some diffuse understanding of some freedom struggle or something like this. And they have a very conflictual relationship with police, right? And the bigger faction of which the faction I'm analyzing is part of, the TCP, is a faction that historically has a really different approach to police. They're not as conflictual, and they try to establish a good relationship through bribes, right? Which in Brazil and Rio de Janeiro is called arrego. And they have also adopted other practices, let's say, that traditional drug trafficking in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, doesn't do. Like let's say that they have approached the militia, the paramilitary forces, and they also instead, because normally drug traffic, they have actually kind of like a better reputation among the communities they control, because normally the drug traffickers, they come from the communities, right? That doesn't mean that the people are somehow supporting this or anything. Most of them, they're also really scared and they want to get engaged, but it's a different relationship. And like the drug trafficking organizations somehow have a relationship with militia groups or even form an alliance is something very, very new, because the militia, the police or paramilitary groups are normally completely opposed, right? And also this TCP faction, it has somehow an alliance with the PCC, which is a really big faction, or how's it called in English? Well, it operates in more than 35 countries, right? And the interesting thing is that, like, traditionally, drug trafficking, in particular the Comando Vermelho, was most of the time associated with Afro-Brazilian religions. This is also owed to the fact that because most drug trafficking in Rio de Janeiro is concentrated in these poor neighborhoods, where you have like a huge share of Black people, and which obviously still practice to a large extent actually African originated religions, which also in Brazil, during slavery, and also in the post-abolition period, they have been forbidden. They have been they're still highly stigmatized. So in order to practice these religions, they were somehow assimilated with Catholic saints. So instead of praying to the African god, they were somehow pretending they're praying to a Catholic saint or something. So in Brazil you have this. So this whole universe is very, very fascinating, and also very much under the surface. But traditionally, drug trafficking factions have been more. If they have expressed some sort of religion, it would have been like more of this African Brazilian faith, which would be Umbanda or Candomblé, which is highly popular in these neighborhoods, right? Because the many Black people of African origin are concentrated there. So like you see, for instance, here in this picture, you'll see a graffiti in one of these favelas, like painted with Saint George, which would be like the Catholic reference, or Ogum, which would be the reference from Candomblé, in one of these favelas. So it's super fascinating, actually. And what happened is
Christina?
that
Christina, I'm sorry, very sorry to interrupt you.
yeah,
So
I'm
you
talking
have
too
left
much.
1 minute. Yeah.
Okay.
1 minute left.
Well, what happened in these territories, or what happened in recent decades, is that actually Pentecostal churches spread a lot, particularly in favelas between 1998 and 2021, the presence of evangelical churches increased by more than 200%. And in these low-income areas, more than 70% of the population today identifies as evangelical, right? Which led then to the phenomenon that more and more drug traffickers would also adopt this religion. And interestingly, the leadership of this TCP faction, some of these leaders, they were actually also converted in prison, where you have many of these missionary activities going on. Also, the other drug trafficking factions, they also obviously operate from prison, and they also have many books written about their operations, or their modus operandi inside of correctional facilities. The interesting thing is about this religious narrative that they can use this, and they're using this for territorial expansion and legitimacy. So, like normally if a drug traffic faction attacks another faction to gain more territory, then they just drug traffickers expanding. Like if Aaron's troop or if these evangelical drug traffickers are doing this, then they can claim somehow that they are fighting the demons, that they are fighting some sort of holy war, that they're doing some sort of exorcism, and most of the time against these African religions, right? And this is a way that they somehow can justify their confrontations with other factions, right? But it's also a way that they control the territories in which they act. So here you can see that, here in the first, these are some newspaper headlines. In the first one, you see an Afro-Brazilian temple or place of worship completely destroyed, right? They destroyed it, these evangelical drug traffickers. In the one below, you see actually a Catholic parish, which was shut down because of the pressure of these drug traffickers. And actually, this whole region is known a lot. Right? There have been some disappearances and also executions directly attributed to these factions and their leaders. But it might only be the tip of the iceberg, because this whole region where they operate is actually known for forced disappearance, missing people, and a high actuation of paramilitary forces, basically since forever, right? And this is like my very short summary of what is currently happening in Rio de Janeiro. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. That's really fascinating. When I lived in Latin America, I had learned that you can only trust the evangelical taxi drivers, for example. And I think this truth is no longer valid. So thanks very much for the insights. So we have come to an end with all the speakers. So we would have 7 minutes left, but we can extend our session by a maximum of 5 minutes. We have a few questions here in the chat. And I would quickly go through these. Sophia, there were basically 2 questions asking about if there is an emerging presence of Mexican organized crime in Belgium,
I've read
in
it.
the synthetic
Yes.
drugs industry, like in the Netherlands or not. Maybe you can quickly reply and be no longer
I'll
than
try.
2 minutes.
I'll try. So in general, actors involved in those groups in my study were Belgians and Dutch people. It remains a story of Dutch people and Belgians, as I saw it in my study. However, we've seen some cases in 2019 and 2020 of Mexicans coming in to make crystal meth in Belgium. So they operated as a crystal meth cook here. And we think they were brought in to share their Mexican method, as we call it. Like a kind of consultancy. So we have the labs, we have the criminal networks, we have the precursors, the chemicals to make it. And the Mexicans, they knew how to make the crystal meth, so they were brought in. I suppose by human trafficking, it's what I've referred to. Business is business. So those are not family members, as I said. They were brought in just for criminal business and to improve the criminal activities. I had a case in my interviews of a person coming from China to do exactly the same. So it is done in other countries as well. So I think the problem is a little bit dramatized in the media. There were only a few cases of Mexicans coming in, and in recent years we don't see that anymore in the lab. So they came here for a short period of time to share their knowledge, and we don't find them anymore. So that's my answer.
Okay, thanks, Sophia. And maybe to add, I mean, they may have not stayed in Belgium, but they have moved on in Europe. So there have been cases. Last year there was a massive meth lab busted in southern France with links to Sinaloa cartel. And recently, even though the evidence is not so clear, also even in Poland. So in the north of Poland, there was a bust of a meth lab with alleged links to Mexican organized crime. So it seems to be an evolving situation. Thanks,
Yeah.
Sophia. Ruby, my colleague Ruggiero has put a question into the chat. I'm not sure if you have seen it. Okay, so I don't have to read it. So please.
I know. I think it's an excellent question. I think while we agree that seafarers should not be presumed guilty, the reality is that crews have been convicted in cases like the MSC Guyane, the UPC Savannah, etc. I think one critical area is to focus on is the continued advocacy and accountability across jurisdictions. And I speak from experience as having been the primary claims handler for schools on the UBC Savannah case, which was arrested in Alta Maria, Mexico, back in July 2019 for drug smuggling. In that incident, just to give a bit of context, 225 kilos of cocaine were discovered on board within the bulk cargo. It's not even container vessel, it was a bulk cargo. And a master reported it immediately. Yet the entire crew was taken off the vessel, detained, and arrested. The master eventually spent nearly 20 months in prison in a high maximum security prison in Tamaulipas, which is a very known prison for cartels. And he was in prison without formal charges because Mexican law mandates pre-trial detention for serious offenses, even when innocence is clear. So it took intense diplomatic pressure and legal intervention to secure the release of the master eventually. And that, in my view, is just unacceptable. And in light of that, I think industry bodies and companies must push harder for global adoption of the IMO, ILO fair treatment guidelines and create mechanisms to sort of hold jurisdictions accountable when due process is ignored. This means lobbying through associations like the ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping, and OCIMF, engaging with flag states, and perhaps forming more rapid response consular and legal networks. I think we also need more formal agreements with high-risk countries to ensure timely investigations and fair treatment and not to implement a blanket criminalization process. So ultimately, protecting the crew requires moving from more passive statements to active advocacy, pressuring governments, aligning with international conventions, and ensuring that seafarers always have immediate legal and consular support when things go wrong.
Thanks so much, Ruby. That's very interesting insights from usually an angle that we don't see that often in organized crime research. So that's really great. Christina, there's a question for you. I don't know if you have seen it in the chat, like the $1 million question. So Rio as a very challenging environment for intervention into criminal markets and organized crime, with so many de facto players having power in the city. So how do you see the way forward in addressing these issues in Rio, and how to handle organized crime and the proliferation of such groups as the ones you just described?
Yeah, well, thank you. This is actually a very great question. I believe that yeah, the notion of security is profoundly flawed in a way that we currently tackle it. As you know, like there has been like a big what they call in Brazil police massacre a couple of weeks ago, with more than 120 people dead after this intervention in a neighborhood also in Rio, controlled by organized crime groups. I believe that in order to actually make an impact, like first thing we need to consider is that security means human security. And then I'm also coming, from a feminist standpoint, and then I'm also saying, like human rights, women's rights, children's rights. So we need to put like the most vulnerable in the center of our discussion, which means like the women and children in the communities and also the workers. And then from then we can have actually a discussion how to handle the security situation. In terms of organized crime, this means concretely, that this mindset somehow like framing the whole community as the enemy. I believe it needs to be reframed in a way that one understands now actually, the state needs to work for these people, needs to establish a good relationship with these people, needs to protect these people, and cannot like co-criminalize them because they are sharing a certain territory with, where also organized crime groups operate, which is nothing what these people, these workers, these women, these children want actually. And also concretely, one probably needs to have a more profound debate, about what can we actually do to improve the general situation in these communities? What can we do in terms of infrastructure? What can we do in terms of housing? What can we do in terms of access to education? What can we do in terms of improving, the situation of poverty? Because poverty is actually a huge driving factor into crime. When people in a society like the Brazilian one, or especially in Rio de Janeiro, we have this huge gap between very poor and very rich, where people just somehow see, oh, look, there's a certain standard of living life. I'm born here. I don't have access to good education. I don't have access to university. I don't have access to certain neighborhoods. And then like the fast and easy money is to get engaged in crime. And it was also something that happens a lot. So I believe that this whole conversation needs to be reframed, and I believe that the most efficient combat of organized crime is to invest heavily into the social state.
Thanks so much, Christina. We are beyond time. This was really fascinating. I hope to be in touch with you with this great panel. Whatever you need from the GI, please feel free to reach out. And also thanks to the audience for staying with us. And I think, there's also most of the papers you would actually also find online for what we have heard, and some press coverage in your case, Christina. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening or rest of the day, wherever you are. And looking forward to meet again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
You see you all.